For the month of May, we're kicking off a series I'm calling Foundations. Now, for our international listeners, we'll be exploring words that have been attributed to the very fabric of this great experiment that we call America. For our U.S. listeners, hopefully these episodes can provide some additional context or new perspective on the origins, meanings, and the reason we place so much value on these words as ideals, concepts, and cornerstones. The first episode in the Foundation miniseries is Freedom. This episode is dedicated to all of those who've stood up, spoken out, and sacrificed for freedom, whether in uniform or in protest, in the halls of power or the streets of their hometown, defending it abroad or building it at home. Your courage, your conviction, and your voice shape what freedom means, not just in law, but in life. This one's for you. It began with silence. No papers, no declarations, no anthems or revolutions. Just the feeling that something was missing, that a man bound to the soil he didn't own, or a woman who couldn't speak her mind, was owed more. What is freedom really? A right? A feeling? A myth we sell ourselves? Or a word so slippery it's worn down the soles of every movement that tried to catch it? For some, freedom is a flag, saluted at dawn and draped at dusk. A battlefield remembered in dust and blood. A bullet carried not just in steel, but in memory. For those who've worn the uniform, freedom is not abstract, it's personal. It's the oath you swear, the loss you carry, and the silence that follows a folded flag. And for many more, it's a word, one they've heard all their lives but never truly held. In ancient tongues and modern slogans, in whispered prayers and shouted protests, freedom has danced across our history like a torch. So today we're chasing it, not just the idea, but the word itself. Where did freedom come from? What did it mean when it was born? How has it been wielded, warped, and weaponized? And who decides who gets to say it? This isn't just about liberty and law, it's about language. Welcome back to Lexicon, the show where words get cross-examined, stripped down, and thrown into the historical spotlight. I'm your host, TJ, and today we're unpacking a word that's fueled revolutions, been prayed over in foxholes, and plastered across bumper stickers. A word everyone claims, but few can define. We're talking about freedom. The English word freedom comes from the Old English freodom, meaning state of free will, emancipation, or deliverance. It's built from freo, free, and the suffix dom, which meant state or condition. So a state or a condition of being free. But to trace its soul, we go deeper, into that Proto-Germanic frias, meaning beloved, not in bondage or free within the tribe. And friage comes with the even older Proto-Indo-European root pri, which meant to love or to hold dear. So the earliest meaning of freedom wasn't political, it was personal. You were free not because you had no master, but because you were beloved, part of a tribe, a family, a circle of belonging. You weren't a slave or an outsider, you were one of us. And that flips the modern idea on its head. Today we imagine freedom as autonomy, but to the ancients it was inclusion. By the time freedom hit Middle English, it had already started to evolve, taking on meanings like exemption from slavery or confinement, and even privilege or generosity. The word was stretching beyond kinship and into society, law, and eventually ideology. The earliest known uses of freedom in Old English appear in legal and religious texts from the 9th and 10th centuries. Now, these weren't soaring speeches or declarations, they were transactional. Charters, wills, and manumission documents used freedom to describe the release of a thrall or a bondsman from servitude. But even in those dry legal records, something radical was happening. A word was being used to separate one human life from another, to define who got to act, to speak, to own, to move, and who didn't. As medieval Europe evolved, so did freedom. It expanded beyond individuals into land rights, taxation privileges, and church exemptions. A free man, a freeman, in the 12th century might not have been rich, but he wasn't bound to a lord or a serfdom. He could marry, move, own property, And that idea that someone could live unbound began to grow. And then by the 14th century, we see freedom showing up in English literature and law with more abstract meaning. And I know I like to quote this book a lot, but it's a classic. In Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, a character is described as being of gentle freedom, meaning generous, open-hearted, and noble. So the word was bending again. Freedom didn't just mean free from chains, it meant free in spirit. Fast forward to the 17th and 18th centuries, and the word lights a fuse. The Enlightenment hits. Empires stretch. Colonists bristle. And then, 1776, the U.S. Declaration of Independence drops a thunderclap. Quote, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. End quote. You notice something? Freedom isn't there. The founders chose liberty, a word borrowed from the Latin libertas, the Roman ideal of a civic participation and legal independence. So what's the real difference between freedom and liberty? Well, although we use them interchangeably, subtle distinctions do exist. Freedom tends to be broader. It's that raw ability to act without the external restraint or oppression. Think of it as having no chains on your wrists, literally or metaphorically. Liberty, on the other hand, is freedom that's explicitly recognized, protected, and defined by law or society. It's the structured guarantee of your freedoms, like your rights enshrined in a constitution. In other words, you can have freedom without liberty, living without rules, yet vulnerable to chaos. But true liberty always involves some measure of organized protection, laws, rights, and institutions that define and safeguard how we experience our freedom. So, when you think liberty and justice for all, remember that liberty is the protected playground where freedom can safely thrive. And for the writers of America's Constitution, they chose liberty because it sounded stately, classical, clean, that good Latin root. Freedom, by contrast, was older, earthier, Anglo-Saxon. But that didn't stop it from becoming the people's word. While liberty rang from marble halls, freedom marched in the mouths of soldiers, slaves, and suffragists. It was the cry of the oppressed, the working class, the rebel, and the reformer. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, not guaranteeing liberty, but declaring that all persons held as slaves shall be thenceforward, and forever free. Freedom was now moral, political, contestable. It marched again in 1963 when Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and declared, "Let freedom ring." Not liberty, freedom. Because freedom is the word you bleed for, the one you fight to get back, the one you whisper into the dark and scream into the fire. It was the word on John Lewis's tongue as he crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The word sung by Fannie Lou Hamer when she told America she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. The word echoed in every military oath and chant. Freedom was not handed out like a gift. It was earned, demanded, and in some cases, unfinished. Then came September 11th, 2001, and once again, freedom was thrust into the center of the American identity. In the days after the attacks, it became a unifying cry. Quote, freedom itself was attacked, and freedom will be defended, President George W. Bush declared. For a generation of service members, including those who volunteered in the days, weeks, and years that followed, freedom was more than a slogan. It was a mission. But even then, the word carried complexity. As America entered into 2 decades of war, the definition of freedom became layered with grief, duty, disillusionment, and debate. What were we fighting for? Whose freedom? And how do we measure it? For many veterans, freedom became personal again, something bound not just to a flag, but to the faces of those that they served with. It lived in the moments of clarity under fire, in the weight of memorial ceremonies, in the quiet knowledge that the cost of freedom isn't always paid in victory, but in sacrifice. And for others, civilians and critics alike, freedom began to feel hollow, commercialized, or used as a cover for actions that they didn't support. The word was once again evolving, contested, charged, echoing with contradictions. But that is the nature of freedom. It's never static, it's never clean. It's a word that lives in tension between promise and reality, love and loss, belief and betrayal. A word worth fighting for and fighting over. Now, freedom is everywhere, and it's always up for debate. It's the right to protest or the right to ignore protest. It's the right to say what you believe or the fear that someone else's belief might silence yours. In art, freedom lives loud. In Simone's I Wish I Knew, in Springsteen's Born in the USA, in Braveheart, Mel Gibson's Scream turned into a meme and a motto. In Captain America, freedom's wrapped in vibranium and the flag. In The Matrix, it's about waking up. In The Hunger Games, freedom is rebellion. In Star Wars, rebellion with merchandising. And let's be honest, freedom also sells. Freedom to choose your plan. Freedom fries. Freedom with a 0% APR for qualified buyers. The same word that ignited revolutions is now printed on koozies. In artistic hands, freedom is sacred. In political hands, it's strategic. In corporate hands, it's negotiable. And in every case, it reflects our collective soul, or maybe just what we think will get clicks. In French, liberté echoes the Enlightenment. In German, Freiheit bears that post-war weight. In Arabic, Huria, with its combined meaning of liberty and freedom, rose up with the Arab Spring. In Swahili, Uhuru Peak crowns Kilimanjaro, aptly named to represent the hard-earned freedom of Tanzania and Africa. In Mandarin, Ziyu balances freedom with harmony. In Russian and several Slavic languages, Svoboda is both hope and propaganda. Some languages split the word in two, legal liberty versus emotional freedom. Others blend them. But in every case, the question remains, what are you free from, and who decides? So where does that leave us? Freedom is one of those words that's so loud, we stop hearing it clearly. We wear it, we wave it, we weaponize it. But when you strip it down to its roots, it's not just about politics or power. It's about belonging. It's about who counts, who's allowed in. It began not as a flag or a firebrand, but as a quiet promise. You're one of us. You're safe here. And over centuries, that promise has been broken, reclaimed, distorted, and redefined. Freedom has been sung, shouted, sold, and mourned. It stood at the center of revolutions and at the edge of heartbreak. And the truth is, we still don't agree on what it means. But maybe that's the point. Maybe freedom isn't a finished idea. It's a living one. Something we can argue about because it matters. Something we chase because we know what it feels like to lose it. And maybe, just maybe, the way we talk about freedom says more about who we are than any law, slogan, or speech ever could. So the next time someone tells you what freedom means, ask them a question. Freedom for who? Because that's where the real conversation starts. I'm TJ, and this has been Lexicon. Thanks for listening, and for caring about the words that shape the world we live in. As always, Lexicon is written, recorded, and produced by me, your logophile companion, TJ Martin. Sources and additional credits are in the show notes. Thanks for listening.